Hello, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. I think that some of you are not listening to what I am saying, but maybe from the Spanish session. Okay, so I think that you are listening me, right? Okay. Okay, so are we ready to start? I think that you can hear me now because my microphone is on. Okay, thank you everyone. I'm really happy that you are listening. And I was going to say I'm really happy to see you, but because I cannot see you, I am really happy that you are here. So, welcome to this third session of process evaluation. You might think that maybe this has been a lot to take in, but we also have a fourth session. But I really hope that I am conveying the importance of process evaluation and that you feel excited to get one or to conduct one. So I think that there is a lot of information that we have to share, but I'm trying to share this information in a simple way. So in this third session, I would like to say to recap. So as you might remember, first we included this in the process of public policy, and I was explaining how a sustainable improvement mechanism is very important. So that was the aim of the first session, and also defining how it is, how this works. And then we talked about the variables, the key elements and components. And in this third session, let's say that we are going to be more concrete, and we are going to say, okay, if we want to make a process evaluation, or if we want to ask for one, what components do we want to include on, and which ones? I would like to show you the Mexican model, not as a perfect model. Of course, it can be improved, but I think that this is a good reference to work with and also to analyze. So we could start with this model because this is the model that I do know. And in this way, we can have an idea of a process evaluation. So on Friday, we are going to have the last session, and we are going to have a report for a process evaluation. So what we're going to do is, like, we are going to start working with this process evaluation and what we need to include in field work. I think that this is a great plan. So today we are going to have a brief summary of what we saw in the last session regarding the key elements, and we are going to talk about this and maybe some things that might go wrong. As I told you on Friday, this is not a pessimistic idea. I am not focusing on mistakes, but I would like to mention some previous experiences in order to avoid this kind of mistakes. And this is how we can share the importance of what has gone wrong and also so that you do not repeat these mistakes. This is what institutional learning is about. So we are going to analyze process evaluation model proposed by public policy in Mexico as a reference to improve. But I think that this is an objective model. And also we are going to talk about the ones that could evaluate the processes. And this is our plan for today's session. I think that you agree. I would like to start. And as I mentioned, we are going to recap a bit on what happened on Friday. So this is very important. Remember that we talked about the main elements in a process evaluation, and we included three. We have to include the context. We have to take into account the external elements that influence on the goods and services delivery and the program. And we are talking about cultural, economic, infrastructure, social contexts, and also contexts that have to do with new elements, for instance, earthquakes, floodings, hurricanes, and everything that can have an impact on public policy. So this is a very important element, context. The second element has to do with implementation. How is the implementation achieved and how it is delivered? How many elements do we have to deliver either the good or service that was proposed in the public policy? And the third element has to do with impact mechanisms. How do we transform something? For instance, this has to do with causal logic, the elements that we have to transform or change this phenomenon or conduct, or this can be interactions or some behavioral changes, the effects that we expect that are going to happen from the operation. So to talk about a process evaluation, we need to include these three elements. The context has to do with the design, the implementation, if it is happening as it was expected, the structure, the equipment, and the right dosages. And if we are achieving what was expected, this transformations, this practice transformations, if we understand a public problem, and if we are achieving this, if the process evaluation doesn't include these three elements, then we are going to miss something important for the process evaluation. So as a recap and to summarize, you might remember that we also said that it is very important to assess how the implementation is delivered, and we need to analyze the indicators. First, we have the dosage, for instance, how much is delivered, if this is the right dosage or amount that was included in the design, if these are the right amount of resources, and if this includes the amount of material that was expected. A second indicator is acceptance. How much do the beneficiaries actually receive? And if they are receiving what it was expected or as planned, if they are receiving the resources. And third, it has to do with scope. If we are reaching the target population, or if we are missing a very important sector of this population. So this can be not only concerning the amount, but also specific characteristics. For instance, maybe we are not including women or parents or a sector of the population that is not being included in the beneficiaries when the design was. And we also need to talk about adherence and implementation quality. To what extent is the program implemented? If everything is happening as expected, and the elements that we need to include to reach that specific sector and to meet its objectives. So how do we guarantee that everything is happening as planned? And finally, to summarize, I want to talk about a question that Milton asked. on Friday, but the system had some technical issues and we were not able to answer this question. So Milton said, I wrote this question, and Milton said, so from the negative results of a process evaluation, can you determine or finish or end this? And if I understand, Milton, what you said is that if a process evaluation can cause a program to end. So what do you think? This diagram, I included this diagram because this is the one that we used in the first session. This has to do with public policies. And as you might remember, a process evaluation had to do with the fourth point. When we are implementing the policy, we conduct a process evaluation to analyze the policy. So in that sense, if a process evaluation can end a program, for instance, I think I would like to know what you think, but I think that this would not be ideal. For instance, a process evaluation doesn't define the continuity of a program. So that's why you have the impact evaluation. A process evaluation changes the program. It helps us to analyze the program, and if something is happening that was not planned or expected, then we can make the necessary adjustments to change the program. Or for instance, if this is happening in the way in which it was expected, but maybe there was a problem in the design, or maybe there is something that modified the situation. And the objective of a process evaluation is not saying if the program is going to continue or not, but rather analyzing if the program is going to continue. If a process evaluation renders some negative results, then we have to make some adjustments or modifications. But the objective of a process evaluation is not determining the continuity or end of a program, but rather understanding how can we maximize and how we can make the program achieve its objectives. So we need to assess, we need to adjust, and also correct anything that we need to. And we do not have to make any decisions so far. After we're going to be able to make the necessary adjustments. And in this point, in this section, the result might be maybe ending the result or the intervention. So I really hope that I answered your question, and also everyone. So thank you so much. I know that I answered your question. If you have any other questions or doubts, please feel free to ask them. So now let's talk about the second point. This doesn't have to do with what could go wrong in a process evaluation, but it aims at sharing the experiences of other researchers and other people so that we can avoid these mistakes. Maybe we can have more things that could go wrong. And also, I think that your experience is very interesting, but these are some facts. For instance, I would like to divide this in 3 sessions, something that could go wrong before collecting data. As you might remember, one of the main characteristics in a process evaluation is that it has to do with the field work. For instance, the processes, the characteristics, the resources, the transfer of resources, any good or services being delivered has to do with field work to be able to assess this. So there is a stage before data collection, another stage during, and then another stage after. So if we had to organize these things that could go wrong, let's start with what could go wrong before data collection. So this has to do with collecting data on early stages of the program. If implementation is not completed, or if the operation is not in the field, it is being prepared, planned, and organized. And if we start measuring or collecting data on the implementation, maybe we are not going to be able to obtain the necessary information. And maybe this was because this was not the right time to conduct a process evaluation. So this could lead to some mistakes. and we need to conduct the process evaluation in the right time. So you might ask, okay, so when is the right time to do so? This has to do with work and negotiation with with the implementators of the program. So we have to ask them if this is the right time to collect data on the field. So as you might remember, process evaluation has to be coordinated with the team that is going to implement the program to locate the team that is going to work. And of course, we need to analyze the data that we're going to include. A second point has to do with not obtaining the necessary inputs from the administrators or stakeholders. So that's why it is very important to coordinate, to have a good coordination, and to understand when is the right time to talk with the team that is going to work. And if we do not conduct this in an organized way, then we are not going to obtain the right answer from the organizers. A third point has to do with failing to understand the expectations of managers about what can be learned from the evaluation. So again, of course, it is very attractive to measure impacts, even we do not have the conditions, or even if it is not the right time. But many people believe that the impact evaluation is going to provide key information, but the reality is that process evaluation is way better. So sometimes I think that an impact evaluation is going to provide key information, but no, we need to be clear concerning the expectations of what can be achieved and the possible solutions that an evaluator can provide. And also, the administrators have to contribute and understand understand what is going on with this evaluation. Just as in other cases, what is going to help to minimize this is to be well coordinated with the evaluating team. And the last detail or the last detail that I want to mention is that if we make the mistake, for instance, of not conducting pilot tests, and we do not test the equipment, and if this happens, maybe the tools are going to fail and they are not going to provide precise information. So I think that I already said this to you, but for instance, if you start conducting surveys regarding processes and you want to ask the beneficiaries, for instance, do you know how easy, or tell me about your experience regarding filling the form, the X form. So maybe she or he is not going to be able to say, oh, okay, this is the form that you're talking about. But maybe if we do not test the instruments, we are not going to be able to identify that there is a gap between the formal name. And if we do not detect this, then the information is not going to be precise, because the beneficiary is not going to be able to provide the necessary information regarding this specific form. And maybe we are going to have a misconception and we are going to have the wrong information, because maybe the beneficiaries are not aware of the formal name of this form. And this is a very basic example, but I think that this is a good way of explaining this. And we need to test the instruments. And we need to guarantee that it is not biased and a lot of things. So you need to understand that it is fundamental to have pilot tests. This is going to improve the possibilities, and it is going to provide the necessary information. And maybe something that could go wrong is the ability of data collectors. We already talked about the instruments. We were working with pilot tests. We made sure that everything was working in the design, but now we need to make sure that the ones who are going to apply and use those instruments in the field, they need to understand the forms or formats. They need to understand the objectives. They need to know how to treat data and treat people. And I think that for everything, this is fundamental. This is a key element to guarantee a good training. I am going to I'm going to stop the video so that we can have a better connection. So I think that this is something that we need to take into account before we conduct a process evaluation and before we collect data. I am just going to fix something because, okay, yes, I'm ready. So some mistakes that we can avoid during data collection. So if something happened or changed, this first section says that maybe we are going to fail to identify and adjust changes in procedures during the collection measurement process. Maybe I am just repeating myself, but collaboration and coordination with the implementing team is going to be fundamental, because it is very important that they say if there was something that was changed or adjusted, and we need to be open to identify something that might be happening, something different that is happening. So we need to be aware of this. We need to identify this and make the necessary adjustments. Coordination is going to be fundamental, but we always need to be aware of the circumstances if something happens or changes. The second point has to do with collecting a lot of information and not allotting enough time for analysis. And this means that, of course, it is very tempting when we go to the field and, for instance, we think, okay, we are here and we can have a lot of information and then we are going to see what happens. But this is not going to work. This is not ideal because we have a lot of information. We have a misconception regarding the planning. So we have to obtain the necessary information and not just a lot of information. This requires, of course, a strong planning exercise. This requires efficient organization. I am not saying that you cannot collect more data, but what I am saying is that we do not need a lot of information, because otherwise we are not going to have enough time. And at the end, we're going to have things that are not going to be useful. And this is really frustrating. For instance, interviews or surveys, 2 hours. These are not elements that are going to be useful. They are not going to provide necessary information. Maybe we are going to lack information. For instance, if someone receives a 3-hour survey, maybe they are not going to feel it. So of course, we need to be aware of this. And we need not to obtain a lot of information. And a third point has to do with failing in the conceptualization or implementation of the intervention. And the pilot test and the work with and the teamwork is going to provide this information. We need to understand the true nature of the intervention and the way in which it was conceptualized. For instance, if this is conceptualized as a compensatory public program, or if this is a preventive public policy, if this is a corrective public policy, we need to analyze the problem that it aims to solve and how it conceptualizes the problem. And this is going to help us in the design. But of course, it is very easy to make a mistake. In data collection, for instance, there are a lot of mechanisms to do this. We already covered this. We talked about the different methods, and we said, for instance, that in the qualitative focus, we need to use focus groups, structured or observation. And for instance, if we do not make sure that there is not a lot of information, we can alter, for instance, or modify, or we can change the conduct of the phenomenon that we are trying to study. And this would be something terrible, because there is a bias in the results. So we have to have a clear ethics. And another important point is designing samples that are not representative. And these samples are going to provide data. But for instance, if we design samples, we need to make sure that they are representative regarding the composition of the population and the different groups. So we have to take care of this. And the last point has to do with not taking into account the natural maturing process of the participants of the program. So what do I mean? Many times we have interventions that are targeted at specific populations, for instance, children or young people, and when they mature, at some point they are going to change and the circumstances are going to be different. So of course their behavior is going to change, and maybe it is not directly related to the program itself, but rather to the maturity process. So we need to take this into account and be aware that maybe this is not what is going to happen in for instance in a process. So far so good. Do you have any question, any doubt, something that you want to say or add? Okay, so far so good. So now let's talk about the last part that where we can make some mistakes, and this is after data collection, and we can focus only on the average results, and we can lose sight of the disaggregated results. So of course this doesn't have to do with just focusing on results, on average results, but how do we include this? How do we include the results that were in other ranges? We are not saying that this is going to be to general. We are going to generalize with this, but the results that do not behave in the same way are very important, because of course this might indicate that something is wrong. So we need to take into account these results, not only the average results. So we need to analyze what happened in these different scenarios and results. The second point has to do with not reviewing the preliminary findings with those in charge of the programs. So how do we make sure that we are clearly understanding this data? How do we make sure that that there is a right interpretation regarding the qualitative interpretation? And this, as I have mentioned before, we need to contextualize this with the implementers of the programs. A third point has to do with not supporting conclusions with specific data. Of course, it is going to be great if we achieve a result and if we achieve a conclusion, but how do we help the ones that are in charge of the program to understand that this happens because of something? We need to be very clear and very transparent. Our recommendations or our conclusions, and also, and last, for instance, we can make mistakes if we have a limited or poor results presentation. If we fail at being able to provide information regarding our results, I know that it is, for instance, if we have a presentation with a lot of slides, this is something very different for implementators. I do not say that we only include 3 or 4 words, but of course it is not going to be useful if we have a slide with a lot of information. So we need to include, for instance, a photography, a contrast table, slides, a matrix for achieving results. So remember that process evaluation aims at helping the program, and the presentation of the findings has to give a good closure to a certain or specific work. So how do we make sure that the presentation of results maximizes the possibility for the implementators to understand this, and also conveying the importance of the changes that we are currently suggesting? So we need to include this we need to present our results in an easy way to understand. So this is the last part regarding the importance of taking into account everything that can go wrong, and we also need to be aware and remember that this can fail, or maybe this is not going to happen to you, but after you start reviewing this, then you are going to make sure, and then this is going to be great news. So now I would like to talk about the sequence to evaluate the processes. If we are going to analyze the implementation and what is happening and what is not happening according to what was expected, these are some of the things that you need to take into account in a series of actions. Sorry, we had some technical issues. Oh. We need to understand what we are trying to do. So what was happening, who was doing who was following the steps. So the second step has to do with understanding what is happening. We need to do some field work, and we need to understand what is going in the field. And a third point has to do with contrasting what was planned and what is really being done. So if there are some gaps, we need to analyze the causes and consequences of those gaps. For instance, if the textbooks are not being delivered as it was expected, if the money transfers are not reaching the identified population, and what is happening or what is causing this, the consequences, and also what we need to analyze the different alterations that can have an impact. We also need to have a proposal of solutions and courses of action, the different elements that we identify. So what do we propose so that the textbooks are delivered and the money transfers are received? So what are we going to propose to change or modify the gap and the problem, and how do we plan to implement those changes? How do we suggest, and how are these how I'm sorry, it's just that the body pack is not working, so I have to go and adjust the frequency. No sirve.
Tienes que estar allá junto a ella.
Just give me 1 second, please. So, what are the consequences? So what is the proposal of the country to conduct a process evaluation? And this is the section that we're going to analyze. The Public Policy Congress in Mexico has a model. I would like to show you the key components and also what does it mean and how can we do this. So this is not a perfect evaluation. This is just a proposal that we can have to make room for improvement. So what is the objective from CONEVAL? Process evaluation aims at conducting a systematic analysis to evaluate if this meets the objectives. And we also need to make some recommendations for this. So what are the key words? First, systematic analysis, and this is the basis of an evaluation. The second part has to do with operational management. We need to be aware of what is happening in a program. And also the third part is analyzing the improvement recommendations. We need to analyze this, and this evaluation has to include recommendations. So what are the specific objectives of the process evaluation? First, we need to describe the operational management, what is going on at the different disaggregation levels, geographic levels, for instance, national, in another region, in a municipality, in a locality. We need to analyze everything that is going on in every single level. So you might remember that the problems are going to be different. The problems that we are going to face at a specific geographical region might be different from the regional level or another level. Another point has to do with identifying the limits or problems. This means that, for instance, if this is a failure from the law or an operational failure. We also need to analyze if every single one of these processes contributes to achieving the objectives of the program, or if they are not useful. So this is not going to contribute to the process, but they exist. So we need to be very clear and analyze that every single process contributes to the objectives of the program. And we also need to make recommendations, specific recommendations. Remember that process evaluation aims at improvement, and this happens when we have recommendations regarding the aggregate and precise and specific recommendations. So the diagram that I am showing right now, we saw this in the last class, but these are the stages of a process evaluation proposed by CONEVAL. So we're going to disaggregate every single one of this to understand what is expected at each stage. So please analyze this. Please analyze which ones apply to your own countries and the operational function. So let's start with planning. In each one of these, you are going to see the cycle that I showed you in the beginning. So this part of the evaluation will measure the process in order to determine mission, vision, objectives, purpose, the follow-up indicators that are not verifiable, the human resources, and mainly focusing on activities and methods to be able to meet the objectives of the program. So basically, I describe planning. So basically this has to do with an in-house analysis. We are going to have the regulatory documents, and we are going to review the plan of the program.
La segunda fase tiene que ver con
The
la
second
difusión.
stage has to do with dissemination.
Dice, según lo que se promueve,
And
es proceso sistemático
this has to do with systematic process and institutionalized process of information regarding the main characteristics, its benefits, its requests targeted at a specific
Entonces, aquí
audience.
empezamos a ver,
So we are seeing here that we are including the target population. We are identifying the population that is going to receive the benefits, and we are going to analyze how they understand the benefits. So in this part, we are including the target population. In a third stage, we are going to evaluate the support requests. And what we're going to evaluate is the set of actions, instruments, and mechanisms executed by a program with the aim of registering or systematizing the information of support requests from potential beneficiaries. For instance, support requests delivered, how they receive them, how they assess them. So how do we build the bridge between what is planned and the target population? So how is this included in the participation of the program? So far so good. Do you have any question or comment? So now let's talk about the next stage in a process evaluation. So we talk about the evaluation or the selection of beneficiaries. So the process that the process of the program to select the beneficiaries. And in this way, we are going to obtain the register of the beneficiaries. So this has to do with assessing the internal mechanism of the program. So we already assessed how the beneficiaries receive the information, the requests, and the program in this stage aims at assessing who is going to be included in this program. And this has to be a transparent decision focused on accountability. Because remember that this is going to include the benefits. This was not a biased process to benefit some and others and not others. And this has to do with the internal part of the program. A next stage has to do with goods and services production, and this has to do with how the program is, or the actions that it is implementing to deliver goods and services, how it is produced, and how the beneficiaries are going to receive them. So let's talk about an example. For instance, if we talk about textbooks in a school, who is going to design these textbooks and how they're going to be delivered? So we're talking about the plan, the delivery plan, not if this plan is executed or not, because this is going to be included in the next stage. We are only talking about how we think that we are going to deliver the goods and services to the beneficiaries. In the second stage, process evaluation is going to evaluate how this supports, how it is going to evaluate the support distribution, how, for instance, the textbooks are delivered, the vaccines delivered to the hospitals, the materials for building houses, the, for instance, training courses, how they are delivered. This has to do with the beneficiaries receiving this. And one of the last stages has to do with support delivery, and this has to do with the set of instruments, mechanisms, and actions by which the beneficiaries or affiliates receive the different services or types of support. We want to ask the beneficiaries what do they think regarding the delivery of the benefits delivery, if they are satisfied, if there is something to improve, the interaction with the implementators, and if they gave, if somebody asked something in order to receive the benefits.
Y aquí llegamos a la última parte
And this is the last
para la
stage
evaluación de procesos.
regarding process evaluation.
Hay una etapa en donde
There
queremos saber
is a
acerca del
stage
seguimiento a los
where we want
beneficiarios y el
to
monitoreo de apoyo.
analyze, follow up on beneficiaries and support
Suponemos que
monitoring.
efectivamente los
So
beneficios ya
we
fueron
think
entregados,
that
pero
the
necesitamos
beneficiaries, the benefits were already delivered, but we need to
Y la
follow up
evaluación
on what
quiere
happened next.
justamente
And evaluation aims at
las
evaluating
acciones y los mecanismos
the
por los
different
cuales el
actions and
programa comprueba que
mechanisms
los apoyos
by
fueron
which the
entregados a los
program
beneficiarios
verifies that the support was given to the beneficiaries
de acuerdo al
and how they use it
planteado.
in accordance with
Eso
the
es una
expected
parte
benefit.
fundamental de
So
la
this
evaluación de
is a
procesos,
key
porque nos
part
puede dar
regarding
cuenta
process
de una
evaluation,
equivocación en
because
el diseño.
maybe this is going to help us analyze,
Necesitamos
for
saber
instance,
si
a mistake.
efectivamente los servicios
We
están
need
siendo
to
utilizados para los
analyze
fines
if the
previstos
services
y
are
de la forma
being
prevista.
used as planned.
Les voy a poner un ejemplo
I am going to give you an example,
educativo.
an educational example.
Había un programa para mejorar
There
los
was
servicios
a program
educativos
to improve
que buscaba
educational services that aimed at
repartir proyectores para las clases.
giving projectors for classes. And
Consultar internet y proyectar
they
en
thought
su
that the
pantalla
professors
ese
were
error
going
y lo encontraran en internet, y eso haría más
to share what they found in the internet,
información disponible
the
para los
information in the
estudiantes.
internet, and in this way,
Este
this
programa
was going
repartió
to provide available information.
y
So this
llegaban a las
program
escuelas, pero los
gave
profesores
projectors
en
for
las
the
escuelas no los
schools, but the
utilizaban
professors
y los mantenían guardados en
were
el
not
almacén
using them, and they
porque
kept
tenían
them
miedo de
locked
perderlos
because
o
they were
de
scared
descomponerlos o de que se los
to
robaran.
lose them.
Y entonces, ¿qué cuenta iban a entregar?
So
Si ya no tenían
they
el
locked
equipo
them
o lo
because
tenían dañado.
they wanted to keep the equipment in a good condition. So of course they were really scared to use them, and they rather kept them locked. So a process evaluation analyzes if this is happening or not. It can find mechanisms that complement the process, for instance, an insurance or insurance coverage that helps the professors, for instance, because the insurance is going to provide the money if the projectors are stolen, for instance. So follow-up helps us to analyze if the product and we need to have alternatives. But this is only possible if the monitoring is happening and once the service has been delivered. So let's remember that the service doesn't end when the money is transferred. The service ends when we have a change of behavior and we can have information of what we wanted to change or modify. And a last stage that we want to evaluate has to do with customer social controllership and user satisfaction. So we want to have a space for complaints or so that we can know what happened or what went wrong. If someone wants money for the benefit, but it has to the beneficiaries have to provide this information. And this is also a transparent action, and this has to do with accountability because we need to obtain information if something is going wrong. And this also has to do with the evaluation and monitoring this set of systematic exercises regarding the processes or results. And this has to do with monitoring indicators and goal accomplishment. So throughout the process, we had indicators or signals to analyze and to check if the program is working. We need to also review it and check if the program is working and accomplishing the goals. I want to show an annex that the Public Policy Council uses to conduct to conduct process evaluation. This is a format where the evaluator has to be accountable for the program, and he has to answer the following questions. For instance, if there are documents that regulate the processes, this can be yes, partially no, or not. We can either have all documents, we can have, or we cannot have any documents. But we are going to have specific documents for some parts of the process and not for others. So this has to be taken into account to be able to improve the implementation of the program. Maybe we're going to notice that some of the processes do not have documents, and those are the ones that are working in a way that is not right, and this could be something important to improve. A second element has to do with if all the operators are aware of the processes that are being documented. And this could also be helpful to improve. So this as an X-ray that is giving information on what is working and what is not working. A third element to evaluate the consolidation of the program is if the processes are standardized. That is, if they are used by implementing agencies and if all the resources are being delivered in all the regions. Everyone knows that in order for this to happen, they have to follow certain steps. So if this is working in the same way, and if not, then what is happening? But it also provides information on a consolidation program. The fourth element to assess regarding the consolidation of the program is if there is a monitoring system and management indicators. We have indicators throughout the process to analyze if the program is working and how it works. If we do not have them, we are not going to be able to detect any changes or something that is happening and it's not happening in the right way. A fifth point has to do with if there are mechanisms for the systematic improvement implementation. We know the path to follow when we want to change something. We understand the structure to implement actions. And the assessment of these elements will provide a score regarding the operation of the program. If for each one of these questions the answer is no, then it is very likely that what we need is we do not need an impact evaluation to analyze if the program is accomplishing the results. We know that the process is very fragile. So we need to strengthen this by altering every single one of these assessment criteria. So what do we need to take into account when we analyze when we are going to analyze? First, we need to have a detailed description of the activities, components, and stakeholders that make up the process development. This is something needed by the policy council. Coneval says, okay, if you want to be accountable, you have to include these elements. First, you need to give a detailed description of the activities, components, and stakeholders. And activities are requested from a process flowchart. So this is going to provide information of what is going on in the different processes. A second requirement by Coneval is to determine the limits of the process and its structuring. What is meant to be achieved, to what extent, and what does it have to do with the remaining processes. So the report, the evaluation assessment report has to do with the results, what is considered as available resources, as sufficient resources, and what is considered as adequate resources. That is the reference and what we are finding. Johnny has a question.
Dice, en la evaluación
He
de
says,
procesos se debe
in
evaluar
process
que los
evaluation, we
indicadores
have to
estén bien
evaluate
construidos y
that
que
the
respondan realmente a
indicators
los
are
objetivos.
well
Los
developed,
criterios se deben
and in
evaluar
criteria we have to evaluate and to include
Es correcto,
the resources. So yes, you're right. We have to evaluate the presence of the evaluation, but of indicators. But we also need to understand if they are coherent, pertinent, and if they are aligned with the objectives. And we need to evaluate in criteria the resources. So remember that when we talk about process evaluation, this process evaluation has to be held accountable, and it has to analyze if the resources are being delivered and also the necessary ones to achieve the goals. Otherwise, it can be an area. It is something that is going to help improve. So regarding inputs, we are talking about different types of inputs. For instance, time. Time, if is the time in which the processes are being carried out, if it is the adequate, and if it is happening in the expected amount of time, or if we need more time. And if this is happening as planned, if there is a design a mistake regarding the operation or the design. Another very important resource has to do with the staff involved. Is the staff enough? If it has an adequate profile, and if it has the necessary training to perform their duties. Another type of inputs and resources has to do with financial resources. If we have the necessary financial resources, and if this is going to help us to execute things in the way in which they were designed, and if the resources are being delivered in the right time. Another resource has to do with infrastructure. Is infrastructure or installed capacity enough to carry out the process? And this has to do with the different geographical implementation levels. At a federal level, if we have the resources, we might think that yes, but it also happened in the states, in the localities and townships. So the ones who are in charge, if they have the necessary structure, and we also need to take into account the closest implementators to the beneficiaries. They are normally the ones who are really weak regarding resources. So, regarding the idea of what the report has to include, in this analysis we need to include the elements that we have here in the slide. Talking about the products, the process products, if they work as inputs for the process, if there is a coherence, and if it is if this is going to help us to achieve the next process, or if there is something that is hindering the process. We are also going to talk about information systems. So as you might remember, something that we have been mentioning is transparency and accountability. And information systems are very important because there are information systems in the different stages in the process. And they work as information that helps us to understand if this is how everything is happening, and if they are able to be accessed, if they provide the necessary information. So we are talking about this information flow through the program that is going to be able to be accountable. Another element that we need to consider is coordination, and how coordination between stakeholders, between the government levels is happening, and all the institutions involved. If it is being coordinated, if they understand their responsibilities, if everyone knows what they have to do, if they are communicating between each other, if there is a gap or lack of responsibilities. So the process evaluation report has to be held accountable regarding the context and the conditions. So in the last session and in the first part of this session, we talked about the key elements for a process evaluation, and we were saying that one of the main things is context. So what are the economic, social, cultural, security conditions included in the implementation of the program? So this has to be included in process evaluation. What can be altering or modifying the process and altering the evaluation? So maybe there is a state or region in the country that suffered an earthquake or a hurricane, or maybe it has security problems, and the evaluation has to be accountable for this. What elements of the process are altering the development or of the program or evaluation? And we also need to identify the characteristics related to the strategic conditions. How is this important? Why is this important, and why it is important? Why do we have to modify these aspects? And lastly, we have to understand the mechanisms to analyze if the beneficiaries are satisfied with the program, if they received the products or services, and the interaction that they had. So in a more practical structure in the evaluation process in Coneval, these are the components of the report. So take them as a reference. This is not something that you have to include. Just this is an idea. For instance, if you're going to conduct a process evaluation, this would be the elements that you have to include in the report. First, describe the program, how does it work, what is it about, how it was designed, what sector, and everything that understands us to analyze the program. A second section has to do with the methodological design and the fieldwork strategy. What samples were obtained, the instruments that are used, if they were pilot tests, what processes were followed to be defined from a methodological point of view. A third point has to do with the description and analysis of the program processes. And here we have the section where we analyze the program and how it is working. In the first section, we analyze the description. In the second one, we understand how it is working. And in the fourth, it has to do with the gap. In this first section regarding findings and results, we start analyzing the differences that we found and the consequences and effects that this is going to have on the implementation of the program. The fifth one has to do with the recommendations and results and what we suggest for the program. What we suggest so that it can achieve its objectives and what can be changed to do so. And the sixth one has to do with the annexes, and these are the things that are going to provide useful information and they are going to strengthen the evaluation. They provide information on the processes. And this is a fundamental section because, of course, you're not going to add whatever. You are going to include information that the reader is going to be able to consult and to understand in a better way what happened. So what can we expect and what can we include? For instance, the processes flow charts, the processes, every process, the dissemination process, for instance, that has to do with the call, the flow chart of how to identify the beneficiaries, the distribution of goods and services, and
los mecanismos para
the
que
flowchart
estos
regarding the
beneficios
mechanisms
por
for complaints by the beneficiaries.
También en el anexo esperaríamos
In
algo
this
como
annex, we can
el
also
análisis
include the
SWOT, es
SWOT
decir,
analysis,
fortalezas,
strengths,
oportunidades,
opportunities,
debilidades y amenazas.
weaknesses, and threats.
Es esta matriz que nos da cuenta de
So
cómo
this
el
is the matrix
programa se
that
visualiza
provides
a sí mismo,
information
cómo
on the
identifica
program
aspectos de mejora.
and how it identifies certain improvement areas.
Aquí también podemos identificar
So we can also identify
modificaciones normativas, es decir,
regulatory
si la
modifications, for instance, if the evaluation identifies that it is necessary to make a modification of the regulatory documents
aquí esperaríamos
that regulate the program,
a mucho mayor detalle
we
cuál
would
sería el
include
efecto de
this
esa
in a more detailed way.
Un cuarto punto que
A
esperaríamos ver en
fourth
los
point
anexos que
that
se lo
could be
sugiera es la
included in the
propuesta de
annexes is
reingeniería de
the
procesos.
proposal for
Si
process
identificamos que un
reengineering.
proceso no
If we
está
identify that
funcionando
a
bien,
certain process is not
¿qué
working,
proponemos para que
what do we
funcione de la
propose
mejor
so
manera?
that
¿Qué
it works in a
elementos
better
deberíamos
way?
estar
The
modificando para que
elements that
funcione de mejor
we
manera?
have to modify so that it works in a better way.
Otra cosa que podríamos
Another thing
identificar
that
en los
we
anexos son
could
los indicadores de
include
gestión,
has to
el
do with the
análisis de los
management indicators,
cuáles
the
funcionan
analysis
bien,
of the
cuáles
indicators,
deberían ser
which
ajustados.
ones are working, which ones have to be adjusted.
Otra cosa que también se incluye en los anexos
Something
es
else that has to be included in the annexes has to do with the field work log. The evaluation has to provide information regarding the field, the interviews conducted, the focus groups, and lastly, the used instruments. The instruments used to collect that information.
Hay una pregunta de Milton.
Milton has a question and he asks if besides the Coneval model, can I suggest another model or recommend another one?
Conozco modelos
Well, I do know that there are some models in the States and they operate in states. They are different depending on the states. So if you agree with this, I can provide some recommendations of certain models so that you can also check them. So I'm going to share the link, the Coneval link, and also the link regarding this other models in the States. So regarding the annexes, please be aware that this section can help you to strengthen the information that is being analyzed in a process evaluation. And lastly, I would like to explain who could evaluate processes. We already saw that this is a complicated dimension with a lot of variables, with a lot of areas that have to be assessed. Fieldwork is very broad. We have to have statistical analysis. So who could evaluate processes? My recommendation is that it has to do with multidisciplinary teams because this is a very complicated work that requires a lot of analysis and a lot of points of view. So in that sense, my recommendation, because of my experience and because of what I have seen so far, include a team that knows about political science, administration, economists, public management, statistics, organizational analysis, and also a team that has enough expertise regarding implementation of federal and state programs in other geographical levels. A team that has enough expertise in measuring instruments and obtaining information. A team that has enough expertise regarding qualitative data collection strategies. So qualitative strategies, is going to be covered by the economists and administration, but you have to have a team with enough expertise. If you have a multidisciplinary team, you're going to be able to conduct an amazing evaluation that covers every single dimension in the process evaluation. So remember that you need to have analysis, fieldwork, technical information, qualitative analysis, and the integration of these elements will be amazing for the evaluation. Okay, so perfect. I would like you to make some questions. What do you think about this model? Please let me know.
Creo que todo quedó muy claro.
Okay, so I think that everything was very clear.
Cindy pregunta si
Cindy asks if this model has to do with the ISO 9001 law 2015. Cindy, I am not sure about this, but I am going to check this, and in the next session, I am going to answer your question, and if it has to do with this law norm. So I would like to know, why do you think this is important? Why do you want to know if this has to do with this norm? Standard. Okay, she is asking because of the guidelines, because I think that it is very similar to the process evaluation, to the evaluation process. Ada has another question, and she asks if I can share some tools for data collection. So do you mean tools, for instance, for interviews, for focus groups, observation, structured observation, or non-structured observation? Do you mean that? Joanna says, so personally, I was aware of the evaluations of the programs, but I was not aware of the importance of the process that can actually correct the problem. And at the end, we do not have the results that we included in the objective. So I think that this has been really, really helpful. I'm really happy that this is working, because this is what I wanted to achieve. I want you to understand the process evaluation is a very important mechanism for a program. So remember that when we are evaluating impact, there is nothing else to do. We only understand if this worked or not, but this doesn't provide information for improvement. This provides information for improvement, but we do not have enough time to do so. So process evaluation happens, and this allows us to correct on the fly. And that's why it is very important, and that's why it is very useful. So Ada, what kind of tools do you wanna have for data collection? And Milton asks regarding my experience in process evaluation and my experience in Mexico in general. Well, I think that in Mexico, we have a very big problem regarding the conceptualization of evaluation. We have been really worried to execute this instead of including the different improvement proposals. I think that we do not give enough input, that we not include this. And this happens in process evaluation. In Mexico, we need to improve a lot regarding the results. How can we support the programs and to be able to implement these recommendations? So this has been something very complicated. This has been something that has to happen, but something that is not mandatory. So the programs need to include the recommendations, and that's why the programs are not very useful and cannot be used. So my experience in Mexico is that I think that we are improving, and we need to understand that evaluation is very important, but there are not many benefits or incentives to include the recommendations, and we also need to improve the quality of the evaluations, because sometimes if the recommendations are not feasible and we cannot relate them to the context of the program, then the programs do not have a lot of benefits or incentives to use them. I think that this is a long way to go. We need to strengthen this in the evaluation culture. Ada says, so regarding qualitative information, what would you recommend? Well, to collect data from a qualitative point of view or approach, there are three elements that are used and that are fundamental. Frequently, we use individual interviews, and in a process evaluation, this would not be deep interviews throughout time, but rather interviews that happen in a specific period of time, and interviews to the implementators and interviews to the beneficiaries. That is something very powerful. The interview, the group technique, or the focus groups. Focus groups are very important to be able to obtain or to know the opinion of the beneficiaries, because they are a lot and they can be categorized in different sectors. So focus groups with beneficiaries, they are very, very important and substantial, and structure information to be able to understand how the implementation mechanisms are working. Observation allows to obtain information without, and observations that you obtain by observing the phenomenon. And this is something very important because, for instance, if you ask someone, yes, of course, I think that I am very kind with the beneficiaries, I deliver the information, I allot the necessary time, but when you observe the process, maybe something is altering the process. And this is going to help you to understand if something is not working. And for the qualitative information, for a process evaluation, I would recommend interviews to the decision makers, focus groups with beneficiaries, and observation regarding the implementation processes. So I hope that I answered your question. I really hope so. Are you aware of any practical case for a process evaluation? Yes, I do actually. We have some cases of educational programs. I have heard also, I am not aware of the evaluation, but I have heard that the process evaluation of Prospera is one of the most important social programs in Latin America, which aims at fighting poverty. So there is a process evaluation, and I think that this was very helpful. So I can provide the links so that you can get more information on process evaluations in the educational programs and in Prospera. Of course, yes, I am going to provide the links. Do you have any other question or something that you want to add? Okay, so this is the end of the third session. I think that this was a very useful presentation, and so I'll see you on Friday so we can talk about the different ways of analyzing information in a qualitative evaluation, and also some of the examples that you mentioned at the end of this session. Okay, so thank you very much. Have a great day. I'll see you on Friday.